The Joining the Dots podcast focuses on the many challenges facing education and how different approaches and innovations are needed to meet those challenges.
Join co-hosts Matt Jessop and Kingsley as they have discussions with innovative educators, business leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and guests looking at transforming the future of education.
Morning, Paul. Thank you for joining us. Paul works at the University of Derby, and Paul, your LinkedIn post got my attention. I thought it was brilliant. I've read a few since, which are equally as good, but it was the one about bums on seats and our obsession with bums on seats. And in it, you sort of referenced the education system as being broken. So can you sort of tell me, and I don't disagree, I use the word screwed, not broken, but, what makes you feel that
It's been an interesting LinkedIn post, actually, that one. It's got a great deal of interest. And I think that's because of the policy and the directives that came out, from Bridget Phillipson. And I guess it kind of really got my goat a bit. This obsession with get back into school because that's the best thing for you. And clearly, for some children, it is not the best thing for them. So I wrote this post based on my interest in online learning in particular and the work I'm doing with online schools, because they operate in a completely different way, and some of the way they work send children who've been excluded, with those who are refusing to go to school, has really been quite eye-opening and quite fascinating to see. And I just believe that's it was a missed opportunity following COVID, with the obsession to get back to as it was, before, get back to the status quo and normality. And people are making that choice now in increasing numbers. Parents are taking their children out of school, electing to educating them, or putting them into different online learning situations, or schools, whether that's formal or informal.
So, Paul, is the conversation about what children are exposed to in terms of the curriculum and whether it's relevant to them, or is it about the space and their anxiety and their ability to engage in that learning space? So I chair a multi-academy trust of mainstream primary and secondary schools, but also I've chaired an alternative provision and lead our SEND board across our region. And I'm absolutely with you. There are certainly a challenge now. In fact, Matt and I have had a couple of interviews and conversations today already with other guests where that sense of one size fits all, a space that's right for all learners, just doesn't add up. And Matt and many others have talked about the need to think about hybrid learning, that context of actually there's value depending on the child and the topic, between that sense of where that learning occurs. So where's your work sort of dictating? Is it a case of that online school is the best place for all children with SEND, or for all children that are disconnected with learning? Is it a temporary pathway? Is there somewhere in the middle that's the right mix for a learner's journey?
I think it depends on the individual learner. For some, completely online is ideal for them, and that really suits them. For others, it's a case of getting back into learning, or getting that self-confidence back, that they can learn, and they get that belief in themselves, which is being kind of removed. And they can be then transitioned back into mainstream school. And some of the online schools do that, and they do that very well. But for some children, I don't think they can see themselves in that institution anymore.
So when I work with a local authority, Paul, the conversation around the big pressures on our SEND system, whether it's access to EHAs, EHCPs, the pressure on the system, the conversation will always end up with the best place for a child is in a mainstream setting with the right support. And I often think, well, that's right. But again, I don't think the one size fits all equates to that. Matt scrunched his face up because I know he doesn't necessarily agree with me. So when we say the best place for the child is in a mainstream setting, what are we missing?
I think with children today, I think the support structures certainly aren't there, the support structures that they need, and that's not the fault of the schools at all. There just isn't the resource, and there aren't the staff to be able to support the needs of some of those children, I don't think. The conversations with parents, I think a lot of parents have been disenfranchised now, so parents have almost lost belief as well. And that's particularly true of some children. The parents often feel that not only the child's needs aren't being met, but also their needs as a family aren't being met. So for a school, you're then fighting a kind of a double-edged sword, aren't you? You're trying to convince the child that this place is the best place for you. But also, if the parents don't believe that, then how can you convince the child? That's really, really difficult for them. So currently, I think it's a combination of issues. It's meeting the needs of the individual child, whether that's SEND issues like school refusal, anxiety, whatever. It's the communication with parents now who are starting to lose belief in the system, I think, which is why the home education is so big. DFE statistics show that parents are choosing the lifestyle now because they're working from home. They want to spend time with the children. They expect that actually my child can be here with me and we can have a better family life by doing this. You can argue, I suppose, about the curriculum. I mean, dead white man's curriculum.
That's a different definition, one of many we've had over the recent episodes.
But also for some children, particularly from black minority ethnic backgrounds, they see themselves in that curriculum. And if you can't see yourself in the curriculum, how are you supposed to engage with it? So I think we're almost the case of a kind of a bit of a tipping point almost in education now. What do we do? Do we try and maintain this, kind of factory model, which it still is? You've got to get these qualifications. Where when you look at industry now and businesses, they're starting to prioritise individual skills, and they're employing people based on the skill set picked up, and that isn't necessarily from school. They're picking up from their YouTube channels, from their social media channels, from coding they've done, from apps they've made. That's how they're picking some of these kids up now.
Thanks, Paul. Matt, how does that resonate with the different factors you've been kind of chewing the fat over on in terms of the right fit and place and space for children and their development?
It all resonates, and I think, go back to your point about the best place for children with SEND is in mainstream with the right support, and that's probably the case for some, but not for all. And I think it just, everything comes back to this issue that one size fits all. But I'm listening to Paul, and I'm thinking, I agree with what Paul's saying. I agree with what you're saying, and what everybody says. It all comes back to we do need significant change, don't we? Tweaks aren't going to cut it, I'm afraid. I'm just worried about online schooling. I'd be keen to know what Paul thinks about accessibility, because I'm conscious from having looked at some online schools. I mean, certainly Minerva impresses me a lot at the moment. And I know they've got hybrid aspects as well as fully online. But I've seen some others that are extortionate in terms of their costs, and that immediately removes them from the list of possibilities of so many families in the country. Do you see online schooling becoming more affordable? And what do you think of I think I did a post a while back about the concept of parents having a voucher, so they can, instead of the school getting their, say, £6,000 funded, they can use that voucher for an online school. Is that something that's feasible? Because somebody snapped back at me online saying it's the exact opposite of what we need. Didn't give me a reason, and they've probably got some very good reasons, but I haven't had them back yet. But what's your feelings on the accessibility issues of online school?
Well, currently, all the online schools are either working with local authorities as alternative provision, or they are basically businesses. They are independent schools. Yeah. Quite a few of them now are DFE registered through the online school accreditation scheme, so they've got a DFE number and are fully recognised, which is great. But yeah, you have to pay a fee, and that's that is not accessible to some parents. And maybe it should be. So in terms of the voucher, I think personally that's a fabulous idea.
Politicians aren't going to support Paul and Matt on this one, I'm afraid, because the natural persuasion is if we agree and say, well, you can have a voucher and you can decide where, in essence, your ORPU funding is allocated. And if you choose to shop around, by association, the government's saying that's okay and you're welcome to. Whereas actually the narrative is, whilst it's happening, there's not a willingness to accept that's okay. There's a willingness to say, actually, our standardized model of education is the right one, and any deviations from that really are the exception to the rule. And your examples, Paul, tie in with that's the challenge when we see our alternative provisions where we have children that were historically supposed to go into alternative provision for a few months to get the right interventions and support to equip them and set them up to return to mainstream. Many young learners found that was their permanent home until they'd finished and left with one GCSE at the end of it and didn't get an opportunity to flourish. Something Matt and I actually were talking about not that long ago today. So in that context, finding a space that says actually there's a different way, where our biggest barrier for many of our learners is getting you in the school building, to you accessing a quality education online with the right resources and curriculum that might appeal to you, has got to be better than being held in a place for, dare I say it, the perception of naughty kids, rather than kids that have had really potentially challenging childhoods and really haven't figured a way to express and regulate those emotions yet.
Yeah, absolutely. We come across more and more of them. It's interesting, even in the university, in our relatively small department of initial teacher education, I know of at least 3 parents of school-aged children who are having real trouble getting them to school, and whether that's for send issues or their child is just saying, no, I am not attending that school anymore. That is it. I'm just not going. And these are intelligent, intellectual people with what you might, I don't know, hesitate to say traditional middle class kind of values, and are kind of at the wit's end. What do they do? And the policy is heading in one direction. We'll fine you for not getting your kid into school. What good is that? Not benefiting anybody. It's just a crazy idea to be, punitive and kind of issue threats.
I certainly don't think our socioeconomic status in any way prevents us from the challenges we're seeing across the education system with children disengaged with learning, or anxiety and SMH associated with the learning journey. There's a whole heap of conversation we could probably go down a rabbit hole on why does that seem to be so significantly escalated now than it was 5-10 years ago. Is it society? Is it the ability for young people to see the visual stories of others in real time playing out on their smartphones and tablets, whereas before it wasn't? Or is it just actually the world's moving on, pressures are moving on, and children are finding it harder and harder to recognise the relevance of what they're being asked to do? Sometimes that's a tough call when it's a very young child to be talking about relevance. It has to be about nurture and finding something where a child feels that they're in a safe, happy place to thrive. But surely, of all the conversations we've been having throughout our journey on Joining the Dots, Matt, the common theme for everybody is that we need to change, and we need to recognise that we can't have one solution for all learners.
Yeah. I think within that as well, and alongside that, there's almost a disconnect between primary and secondary and FE and FE and HE. So from Paul's perspective, what do you think the most significant disconnect between secondary and higher education, and what would you do about them?
The disconnect between secondary and higher ed.
It doesn't always feel like it's a seamless journey from secondary to higher education, because if we've got this one pathway, how could it be improved?
Well, we're a post-92 university at Derby, so a lot of our students are not from the kind of higher academic background in terms of A-level results. They've got a lot more vocational kind of qualifications, kind of middle range A-level grades. And so that journey is challenging for them to head into into higher education. We suffer, I think, in a simple way, sometimes as scholars, in the way that students still have those kind of anxiety issues when they come into HE, and they've still got the same kind of almost curriculum model of here's some stuff, here's some stuff, learn it and tell it us back, which isn't great. But unfortunately, I think we're very good in the university at contextualising that learning into something which is relevant and meaningful to those children, or to those students rather. And I think that's possibly missing in schools. You look at, say, the content. Here's your GCSE geography. This is what you're going to learn. Is it relevant to you and your kind of background and your experiences? Possibly not. Do you?
Yeah.
What do you see of yourself in this?
Do you think universities working backwards towards schools, talking about Matt's question about that kind of that link between the two, when taking our choices of whether it's our A levels or vocational qualifications, firstly, maybe there needs to be a culture shift that there isn't one's better than the other. They're different. Would be a handy thing. Certainly be handy for parents. Same with apprenticeships, not to always look at them as being something that as a last resort rather than actually a very valid pathway. But do you think there could be better connectivity and understanding that the choices that a child makes post 16, how that links into their choices when it comes to further education and how those pathways are interlinked? Because it feels to me lots of the challenge is you've got this list of subjects and you've got to pick 3, as opposed to understanding the relevance of that and how it will unlock opportunities for career pathways. You're sort of almost finding that segue. Now, I mean, I'd argue in an ideal world we'd change the actual qualification. So instead of you having to remember stuff for 2 years and getting tested over 4 hours, you could actually be judged based on the progress and what you do and how you do that in project based, but also how that might link into my next steps at further education. I mean, it sounds like you're doing some of that by the fact that you've got that broader focus on vocational qualifications, the tangible things that means there is a pathway for a broader subset of the cohort leaving school.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the courses at Derby have a vocational background. That's inevitably from the history of the university itself when it was a polytechnic, and we're going through its university status in being kind of 92. So we're probably not somewhere where you'd come to do a degree in philosophy, for instance, compared to, say, Red Brick University. But there is a funding process through school. You're quite clever, so you do 3 or 4 A levels, and those A levels then open up a particular subset of choices, probably academic choices, at certain universities that you can then follow that through. Whereas if you're, I don't know, you're in school, maybe even a FE college where you've done a national diploma in health and social care, whatever, and then you may well follow that on then in a university like Derby or some of the others, where you start to take those elements of care and choose a degree which is based around kind of progression from that, health and social care vocational course. So, yeah, the whole system does kind of funnel people through, doesn't it? But that's the neoliberal model, isn't it?
I guess we end up distilling it down to getting some UCAS points to calculate how valuable or how worthwhile what you're doing is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's the point, isn't it? That society is stratified by this kind of economic worth that you are perceived to have, as a student or whatever. You have qualifications. Those qualifications, in theory, translate to a marketable value. But I think that's almost coming to an end. I don't see now in the age of artificial intelligence whether that kind of qualification is now relevant anymore compared to the skills that you may well have and could show to an employer and show the worth you have in that sense, rather than I've got this qualification. Look at me.
You've touched upon this, Paul, but if you became education secretary and you were allowed to make the radical reform that politicians won't. In terms of the traditional metrics like UCAS points, what other ways would you design or envisage that could be used to measure success and support the pathways?
Oh, that's a very philosophical question.
Thank you.
What do you believe education is for? Is it actually for qualifications and for economic worth, or is it actually about what can you do as an individual? What can you show? And I think, and certainly we're starting to have to move towards assessments now which are process-based. We know that basically AI can write essays in university, so what's the point? There is no point in saying writing a 1,000-word essay. Then that's just started to be pointless now. So show us what you can do. What have you produced? What have you actually made? Okay, you've used AI, we don't care. We're at the point now where some of us in higher ed, we don't care if you use AI. That's pointless. Just use it and show us what you've done. Show us how you've used it. What have you actually created and made? What's its worth? And critique that journey. And that's where we're kind of heading now. That's what I do with the education system. I would shift it more towards that whole process-based model, not a product-based model.
Well, that's another perspective. And Paul, thank you. What we're trying to do here is introduce future education ministers who will be coming in and changing strategic. So we look forward to your application in due course as well. But obviously on a serious note, I think we all sign up to the fact there needs to be change. I think the challenge is always how we define that. And what Matt and I are trying to do is just capture those different perspectives and find the common ground. And when there's common ground, there's consensus. And hopefully when there's consensus, there's a chance for that voice to be amplified and us to think bigger on it. So really appreciate you sharing a different perspective with us this morning. If you're listening to this, it might be this afternoon or this evening, but thank you for sharing. And as always, we will end with our little tuney outro of today's episode. But thank you, Paul.